Good morning, friends. We're so happy to see you. Thanks for joining us. Students, a reminder, if you need to check in for your attendance, there's QR codes around and on the chairs. So if you need credit for your classes, do it that way. We are super excited to talk to you all this morning. We're from the College of Science, and we're here to talk about AI in science. And we have kind of a wide variety of things we're going to talk about. So I'll just introduce my fellow panelists first. First, we'll hear from John Anderson, Dr. John Anderson. He's on the end. No, actually, wait. First is Dustin. I'm sorry. First is Dr. Dustin Shipp, Associate Professor in Physics. And then we have Dr. John Anderson, Associate Professor in Mathematical and Quantitative Reasoning. And then I'll wrap up. I'm Dr. Hilary Hungerford in Earth Science and also Integrated Studies. So I'm just going to let my colleagues come up and get started, and then we'll have a lot of time for discussion at the end too. So thanks so much for being here. We're excited.
Good morning. So I'm going to talk about a few different things for my section of this. So that we all think of AI as, what started in 2023 with ChatGPT, but it's actually been around for a while before then. So I want to talk about some of my experiences using artificial intelligence that happened even before these large language models that we're getting used to now, or trying to get used to now. And then I'll talk about what's different about the the old versions of artificial intelligence and what we're confronted with now. And then I want to focus a lot on the student aspects of this. What's the role of AI in learning? So a lot of my research deals with Raman spectroscopy, and I'm holding myself back to avoid getting into the details of this, but these are the squiggles that I spend my life studying. I won't, I'm trying really hard not to tell you what the squiggles mean, but it's okay. So each of these little squiggles, these spectra, come from different places. And this is actually from a piece of skin tissue where BCC is basal cell carcinoma, so a type of skin cancer. And so that's the red one, the one that we really want to pay attention to. There's other parts and other structures in the skin, and yeah, that's all. You're right. Right. They're doing their thing, but we really care about where are the red zones. And so what we're looking at now is, so you can see like where each of those points and the shapes correspond to a particular spectrum, and we want to look at. So my job is to find out what part of the squiggles is different about. So yeah, this circle one that came from the red zone, this blue one that came there. So these two came from the cancer zones. The other ones did not. And I'm trying to figure out what makes them different from the others. And so if I break everything up and draw some really helpful lines and everything, I can see some of these trends. Again, I wish I could talk about them more, but I want to make this AI focused. But I say, hey, here are the things that I'm interested in, the things that my eyes see as being different. And then I say, computer, make it so that if I just send in a random spectrum, you can tell me what type of skin tissue that came from, whether that's BCC, the cancer, or dermis dye, the category of epidermis, muscle, and inflammation, that's the EMI, or is it fat, right? And this grid tells me how well it's doing. So the row is what it really is, and the column is what my algorithm is guessing that it is, right? And so you can see it's doing a pretty good job. So 87.7% of the time that there is cancer there, it's saying yes, that's cancer. And so on for the other things. Fat is apparently really, really easy because it's so different than all the other tissues. And so it gets about 100% of the time right. And so we can use that to help diagnose cancer, help the surgeons make cancer surgery better. But what I want to focus on is what does that teach us about what AI can do and what it can't do? Oh, one thing to mention. So this algorithm is so there are different flavors of what we call machine learning. Machine learning is just where you teach the computer how to do something and then the computer does it for you, right? Which is essentially, I mean, it's a flavor of artificial intelligence. This particular one is an artificial neural network. So you structure a computer algorithm like the brain is structured with a neuron going to other neurons and then they go to other neurons and all that. You create that structure in software and then it learns and creates those connections so that it can spit out an output with a given input, right? And so this is a version of AI, very different than what, than ChatGPT or anything, but we can still learn some good lessons from it. So first of all, it only knows what it's been trained on. I have to tell it the answers first. I can't just send in those squiggles and have it spit out, yes, this is cancer, this is not. I have to say this squiggle, this spectrum corresponds to cancer, this spectrum corresponds to fat, this spectrum corresponds to dermis, and so forth, right? So we have to do an extensive training. That training for that model was tens of thousands of spectra, where each of them were labeled and saying this one, all of these are skin cancer, right? Find the common things there. All of these are dermis. Find the common things there, right? If we don't give it something to train on, it doesn't know what it's doing. Also, there was a subtle thing there where I wasn't sending in the entire spectrum. I said, these are the key things that I'm interested in, right? So going back a little bit, right? I said, look at those shaded areas and train on that. I didn't say, here's the whole spectrum, train on that. And the difference is if you train on the whole spectrum, an AI model can get confused. It's looking at a lot of things that are not important, but it will try to make them important, even if they're not. And so if you give it too much flexibility, it will always find a way to use whatever information it's given. So yeah, kind of the art of this is scaling it back, limiting the information that the model has so that it's only training to things that are the most important. And then if it ever got anything, so like it was all in the 80s, 90s, 80%, high 80% accuracy, 90% accuracy, somewhere around there. If my model spit out 100% accuracy, I would instantly know that something was wrong because 100% never happens. There are always, extra things of noise, some variations. I mean, it's biology, for goodness sake. That messes things up all over the place. So if the model's ever getting something 100% right, I know something's wrong. Okay, so how is it different so that was a very small scale that model just for one application. How is that different than the ChatGPT models that we have today? ChatGPT is a lot bigger, right? The training set of that is not just tens of thousands of spectra. Tens of thousands of spectra sounds like a lot. ChatGPT's training set is more or less close to the entire internet. But yeah, just unimaginable amounts of data that's being trained on. And the data is a lot more complicated, right? So I was saying, here are the spectra, but only pay attention to these part of the spectra. Where modern large language models are training to just human language. And how many directions can that go in? And the questions that we ask of it are more complicated, right? My model could ask exactly one question. What type of tissue did this spectrum come from? Now, a large language model can answer any question we type in. Sometimes it gets confused if the question's just off the wall. But, if we can think of it, we can ask it. And that means that the answers are more complicated. We don't just get a categorical, this category, this category, this category. We get language coming back. with its, limitless answer, complexity. And so I think that knowing where we came from and knowing where we are now, I think we can still apply a lot of those lessons. So these are the lessons that I said that I learned from my models that I was training. Oh, and then that also, so this is where the really fun AI generated images come in. So if you're having AI help you as a tutor, which I think that image is just one, I don't know, I don't want that creepy robot being my tutor. What does that mean for us? Oh yeah, we get lots of creepy robot tutors. Um, so what does that mean we can use AI for? What does that mean we should use AI for? So I want to look at both of those questions. So when would AI actually be useful in learning? Keeping those lessons in mind. So if we're asking simple questions, so saying, hey, like there are AI models where they can read the textbook for you and summarize a section. That's pretty simple. Information in, information out. But if you're saying like, hey AI, what's the meaning of life? It's going to struggle. That's too much flexibility. It will give you an answer, probably, but the answer is not going to be very reliable. And so AI can only work with the information that it's given. If we're asking AI about questions that it doesn't have the necessary information to answer, if it's not in the training set, it's going to get lost. It's not, I mean, again, these models, the modern models, are trained to try to give you an answer, even if they don't have something to stand on. But if it doesn't have if you're going outside of the training set of the model, it's not going to know what it's doing. So what's inside, what's outside the training set? I would say that's, if you're trying to write about your life experiences, AI doesn't know that, so it can't help you there, right? That's one example. And then 100% is suspicious. 100% accuracy is suspicious. So whatever comes out of AI, you need to be able to verify it. So when I was first doing my first explorations with it, trying to test it out, I said, hey, write me an introduction that I could use for my research topic. And it started off really strong, summarized my research topic that I've spent years learning. Did a great, first two paragraphs were spot on. Third paragraph, like it sounds a little clunky, like it sounds like somebody who's trying to learn about this but isn't an expert yet. And then by the fourth paragraph, it was citing papers that didn't exist. I could go and look at those papers and verify that they didn't exist. And right, that's where the strength comes in. Like it can be helpful as long as you're checking its work. But then there's the other side, where now we have the creepy robots that are helping students cheat. When should we be using AI as students? So AI can help learning. And I would say that as long as AI is helping learning, that it's doing good. It can also hinder learning. There are some really interesting studies that I think John's going to talk about, or reference. Yeah, that show that overusing AI or using AI in the wrong situations can actually make students regress in how much they know and the skills that they're trying to learn. Another aspect to look at is increasing or decreasing engagement. One of the things, yeah, are we becoming more engrossed in the material because we're having that conversation with AI, or is AI doing all the thinking for us so that we don't have to think about it? And then I think we're starting to get some division lines as we think about things more and more. There are some tasks that are really good for AI to do and some tasks that are really good for humans to do. And we need to figure out what those tasks are and keep those separate so that the humans keep doing the human things and don't try to get AI to take over things that the creativity, the synthesis that humans are much better designed for. And then I think overall, especially in a classroom setting, just ask your instructor what they want. where do they think that AI can help? Where does it hurt? Because believe it or not, I mean, and sometimes when you're, the night before an exam, you're not believing it, but your instructors really do want you to learn this material. They want you to learn these skills, and the learning activities that they're giving you are designed to help you learn. They're not designed to help them have something to grade. Believe me, that's not what we want. So, ask the instructor, hey, if I use AI to help me on this assignment, will that help me learn better? Or will that take away something that you're hoping that I'll do myself that will be valuable to my learning process? Yeah. So I think that brings us to John.
All right, so I'm going to pick up from there, and I am actually not all that new to being a doctor. I earned my degree back in fall semester of 2023. So it was kind of fortuitous too, because my topic actually was on students' reliance on technology. I defended in July of 2023 and what was released publicly in September of 2023, ChatGPT. It could not have been more better timed. So I'm going to talk about a little bit of my research that comes from here, because a lot of what I found, I think, even though I wasn't studying AI specifically, what I've noticed in the research that I'm doing now is showing the same trends, regardless of what the source was. And so what I'm going to talk about are some potential problems of over-relying on technology. And some of the basis of this are two topics. One that's called automation bias, which is the fact that people in general tend to trust something that's automated. The results that come from that have to be true. Let me give you an example. I teach math. I'm in the mathematical and quantitative reasoning department. One of the things that I teach my students to do is how to calculate your car payment, right? We teach you the math behind that. I had a final exam question. The final exam question said, suppose you're about to buy a $14,000 car at 3.5% interest over a period of 5 years, compounded monthly. What's your monthly payment? Final exam question. We've covered it. They've done homework. There's projects. They're doing it over and over again. The number one answer I got was $17,449.36 a month.
That's a lot.
For a $14,000 car. And many of them even wrote a month, because they had a formula and they plugged the numbers into their calculator, and the calculator said the answer was $17,444. So that's what they wrote down. Now, hopefully you can see what's wrong with that. As I talked with a couple of them, I said, what happened? They said, well, that's what the calculator gave me. And I said, tell you what, I'll cut you a deal right now. I'll buy you that car. You make 2 payments. We'll call it even. They said, really? They still didn't get it, right? Because the technology gave them their answer. And so automation bias is this thing that we humans have, that when a machine's going to do something for us, we trust that it's being done right. And one of the reasons for that, these are connected, they're not exactly the same. Automation complacency means that the reason that we do that is we believe that whatever the system is that's working is working right. There's no problems with it. And sometimes it's like my students with the calculator, they're using the wrong formula and putting the wrong inputs in, right? But sometimes the person who designed it made a mistake. And so these are the two main things that I measured to determine how much students rely on technology. And so this is the wonderful thing, right? Task failed successfully. So let's talk about the theory of technological dominance. I'm glad you brought the Terminator in already, right? Technology is going to dominate. It is going to take over the world. Okay, that's not quite what this is saying, but we have this flow chart. And you can see that there's a tendency towards no reliance. I'm not going to use this system, or I'm going to trust myself more than the machine, or there's a tendency toward reliance. And this is built off of 4 main points. The first is, how much experience do I have doing the task? For my students in my math class, when I ask them to find a monthly payment, how much experience do they have doing that? Very little. Just a couple of demonstrations that I've done in class where they've seen it, some homework problems, maybe a project, maybe a test question, and that's about it. Very little experience, right? The less experience you have, in fact, that's the first off-ramp. If you have very little experience, you're going to assume that whatever someone gave you to do this for you is right. which is one of the reasons I think we trust AI a lot more than we should. Because we're asking it to do stuff that we don't know yet, right? And so we're hoping that what it gives us is right. So low task experience. The next one is how complicated is the task? There's a difference between me asking my students to calculate percentages in a budget versus calculating a monthly payment. One's easier than the other. The more complicated it is, the less we want to do it, the more we're going to turn to the technology to do it for us, right? And then the next thing is, how familiar are we with the technology being used? Whether it's the calculator, whether it's a program, whether it's ChatGPT. A lot of people have wised up to hallucinations. It still doesn't mean that you won't fall for them, but you're at least somewhat thinking about them now because you're familiar with whatever AI tool you're using or whatever system you're using. And then the last one is, how well does the way that the program works, the software work, how does that align with the way you think about the problem or an expert thinks about the problem? Now, here's the really interesting thing. There's been a lot of studies, not mine, but I quote them in my dissertation. There's a lot of studies that show that there are two groups that are the most likely to over-rely on technology. And I'd venture that, depending on the topic, we've got both groups represented here. Right? The naive newcomer, the person who's new and just trying to learn it, they're the most likely to think that whatever technology they're given will do everything for them. That one makes sense. The other one is the expert. The more of an expert you are, the more that you know what you're doing, the more that you assume that whoever wrote it does it the same way you want it done. Therefore, we're going to trust the results on it. And there have been studies that show those are the two groups that question least the results of to work in this field, in this area. So task experience, task complexity, how familiar are you with the design and how well does it fit? And so let me talk about my study just a little bit. Now, I was working with engineering students, and they all most engineers have to take a class called statics, where you're looking at, for instance, a roof structure and what happens when snow hits a certain spot on it. Can the roof sustain that, or is it going to collapse? And we should all hope that they can figure out how to make it hold the snow without collapsing, right? But they have to learn a process to do this. And so I wrote a simulation that walked them through the process, asked them to do work, and then they typed in their answers, and then it told them that it either agreed with their answer or it disagreed with their answer, and then gave them a chance to change their answer. So they got 2 shots at every problem. Now you can see 4 groups up here, because the way that I coded the simulation was that half of the students who participated, they were given one that told them the right way to do it. It worked. The other half, I swapped the X's and the Y's in the calculations, but told them it was the way to do it. So the program was written wrong deliberately. They didn't know which one they were getting. But the other thing that I did is I also split them in half along another axis on whether they were informed that they were the first ones to use this or they were told this has been used for semesters, which was not true at all. I just programmed it right before they started using it. But some were told this is a learning tool that's been used for a while, and others were told this is brand new. So we have these 4 groups. We have our control group, which got a good system and weren't told anything, right? Then we had the deceived group. We told them it was working well, and it wasn't. We had an informed group that was told it was working right, but they were told there might be bugs in it, right? And then we had a group that we told there might be issues with, but they had the wrong one. So that created 4 distinct groups, and yeah, it was really interesting. So here's some results. And the way to read this is, remember I told you they got 1 shot, and then they were given a chance to correct. So the first letter is whether they got it right or wrong. W for wrong, R for right. They were then told, based on the simulation, yes, you're right, or no, you're not right. And that was based on either the right answer or the wrong answer, doing it completely wrong. And then given a chance to fix it, and they were given some helps that they could use so they could see how to solve it. And so a wrong to wrong answer means that they got it wrong the first time, and they either stuck with their wrong answer or changed to another wrong answer. And that's kind of somewhat even across the board. It's interesting to me that the control group is about 20% wrong answer to wrong answer. So they were told it was wrong, and then they redid it and still got it wrong for a lot of the time. Then a wrong to a right answer, which is interesting to me how high it is on the deceived and the misled. But here's the big one. Those who were told your answer is right, and they changed it. I don't know how the control and the informed group aren't 0. Hey, I agree with your answer. Do you want to change it? Yes. Some of them did that. But what isn't surprising to me is notice that almost 20% of students who had a right answer when they were told that the simulation is working and they're doing it wrong, 20% of them changed. Check those numbers out right there. And even the misled group has about 10% of them who got a right answer, were told there might be bugs in the system, and still changed their answer. Think about that for a second. Why are they changing their answer? They're right. Technology is telling them they're wrong. And just as telling, the number of people who got a right answer and stayed on a right answer is lower. And these are statistically significant. The ones that I'm highlighting, do the ANOVA test, they come out statistically significantly different. The stats says there's something going on here. That's not just common chance. Okay, now let's look at accuracy. And this table is really big, but again, we're going to focus on the group section. And if you'll notice, the control group and the informed group had very little right to wrong. Oh, this is still counts. These are the raw counts. So that's not the one I thought it was. This is the one I wanted to look at. Thought I took that other one out. So here we're looking, final accuracy. The informed group had the highest final accuracy. They were the ones who were able to go from a wrong answer to a right answer or start and stay on a right answer, right? The control group, about 60%, just a little bit less than 60%. But look at the deceived group. Only 42.1% of the problems that were done by all the students were right. Because, again, what happens? They might have got a wrong answer in the first place, that's fine, but they might have gotten a right answer and they switched it. And the other interesting thing is those who had little faith, this goes back to that first thing that I talked about, right, in the theory of technological dominance. If you don't think that you can do it, if you don't have good confidence in what you're doing, you're more likely to trust the simulation. That's what confidence is measuring, is how well do you think you can do this on your own? It's low. They had very low initial and final accuracy. And the final accuracy got worse because they were so not confident that when the machine told them they were wrong, they listened, right? So what does this mean? What do we find out? Students were listening to the simulation. Now, this is what we call a deceptive study. That means at some point I have to come clean with them and tell them what I did to them, right? I can't just not tell them, especially since this is happening in the middle of the class and they might be worried that this is going to change their final grade because they might have a problem on the final. I deliberately picked a topic that wasn't on the final for that reason. But they listened to the simulation, regardless of what group they were in. When it said your answer's wrong, they all admitted to double checking their work, right? And most of them admitted to changing their answers. And this is before I told them that what was going on, right? The system said my answer was wrong, so I changed it. Okay, most of them used the helps that were built into the system. They're worried about what's going on, especially after they were told their answer was wrong. Okay, maybe I'll hit the help and have it walk me through part of this. Okay, and vigilance is the idea that they have an idea that something wrong is going on. How vigilant are they being? It was low vigilance. The high for any group was 61.8% of the students in that group said they were vigilant. That's the high. Remember, I had a group that was told this might not be working right. And it wasn't. They should have been questioning more on whether the system had issues. The high was 61.8%. And very low awareness of the fact that it could be wrong. And I've got some details about this that I just don't remember off the top of my head, so I'm just going to go ahead and move on. Because some of the factors that I found when doing this, being informed of errors lowers how useful they think the system is, but it doesn't actually change whether they rely on it or not. That's just incredibly weird to me. Okay? Participants agreed with the simulation when they told their answer was wrong, even if it was right. They admitted to being complacent in their answers. I'm just doing what the simulation tells me. It's working right. I've got to do what it says. And few participants showed vigilance prior to the debriefing. As soon as I debriefed, there were a lot of comments of, oh, I thought something was wrong. Thanks. Now that I've told you it was wrong, you're admitting to thinking it might be wrong. And they may have had those feelings before, but the fact is they're not standing up for themselves. They're not thinking for themselves. So what does this all mean for us? They're changing their answers when they're asked to. The thing that we have to think about is when we're using technology, and AI is particular on this, we mentioned the hallucinations, right? you have to be careful about what comes out of it. I use AI a lot. I like to use it to generate ideas. I like to use it because I always think of the same example to give to my students. And then I try and give another example, and it's really just the same example. AI is really good at making me think of other examples, even if I have to sit down and do the math right. Or I have it come up with problems for me to have the students work on in class, but I have to check the answers. Because I kid you not, when I first started using it, 50 times 70 times 80 lost all the zeros. And it didn't know why it was wrong. And I pointed it out. It says, you're right, let's do it again. And it did the exact same thing. I said, you made the same mistake. And it says, you're right, I did. And it did the exact same thing. And I said, you made a mistake again. And you said, you're right. And it did the exact same thing. It never changed no matter how much I'd used it and told it it was wrong. Because the model, my one-off, no, you're doing this wrong, was offset by what it had learned. What else was on the internet, which is really scary. One of the reasons, I remember a faculty member once saying, why is AI so bad at mathematical things? Isn't that what computers are supposed to do, right? Do you know why LLMs are bad? Because they learned off of us. That was their training model, is people helping other people or asking questions on forums and showing bad solutions. And the companies are getting smarter and they're embedding actual math elements into their AI to do something that's math related rather than trying to use the LLM, right? But this is what we're looking at. This is what we're using. Just last night, I'm trying to mod a game that I like to play. And I was asking AI to help me find some things to do some modifications with, and it kept giving me codes that I was supposed to use, and every single one of those codes failed. And every single time I said, it has to come from this file. They're in here. Check the file before you tell me whether I should use it or not. It says, okay, I'm going to start doing that. And then I asked, okay, give me the next one, and it gave me a bad one again. And it kept saying, you're right, I did tell you I was going to do this. I'm still not doing it. From here on out, I will. 7 times. It never got it right. How good is AI? As good as we are when we're using it. So what I hope you're picking up from this, in fact, just one final anecdote. There were a few students in the thing that says, well, I don't trust you anymore, but I'd use simulations in the future. That wasn't the point that they were supposed to get right. It's supposed to be check your simulations, make sure they're accurate. Check your AI, make sure it's accurate. Don't come after me. I'm trying to teach you a lesson. So that's what I want to talk about. Just be careful about those technologies. In reference to one thing that Dustin mentioned, there was a study that came out from MIT where they took, it's kind of similar to this, but a little bit different. There wasn't a deception study, but they had people, not just students, but people trying to learn. And one group had to do it on their own. One group was allowed to use AI as a tool, and one group was supposed to learn specifically from AI. And they used some MRIs and some other brain measuring things. And it turns out that the people who did it on their own, you could see some drastic changes in the way their mind worked. The ones who used it to help had some changes. The ones who used AI to do it for them got worse. Their actual brain structure changed backwards. They regressed because they were using AI to do everything for them. We got to be careful about this stuff. We got to look, be critical, be thinking. That's what you're supposed to be here in college to do, is to learn how to be critical thinkers. That's what we as faculty are supposed to do when we're creating lessons for you, is to get those lessons. So going back, if you're not sure if you should use AI on an assignment, ask your teacher. I think, unfortunately, most of them are going to say no. I personally think that's not necessarily the right answer, but you have to go in with your eyes open. Check what you're doing. Thank you.
Okay, we're not robots, right? We can't pay attention forever. So why don't we take a brain break and just like stretch for a minute? Stand up, stretch. We're in an embodied experience. We're not just robots. This is something we can do that AI can't do. So just shake it off for just a minute. I have a 7-year-old. He loves brain breaks. So we're going to do it. Stand up. Really, seriously, shake it out. Or lay back down. I love that. Okay. Thank you. But don't all leave. That wasn't an invitation to leave. No, it's okay. Okay. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit. Hopefully that got our blood flowing, because we have that and AI doesn't. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about how AI has been used in earth sciences and geography. And then we're going to talk a little bit about environmental impact of AI, in Utah, especially how we might be thinking about that. And then we'll wrap it up and have questions. So I'm a geographer. That's why my PhD is in geography. And as geographers, we really look at the intersections of things. So I really try to look at the intersections of politics and culture and environment. This is why I'm a really good fit for integrated studies too. But for earth sciences, we've been using AI and machine learning to study the earth for a long time. When we think of AI now, it's like ChatGPT, and I use it too. Like it helps me make recipes and stuff, and it's great in a lot of ways. But actually, it's really cool what we've been able to do as earth scientists in studying our earth. So I just wanted to highlight a few of those things and give you a little bit of a timeline. So we started using AI in the 80s, really looking at satellite imagery of the earth. So we have all these satellites around, and we can study in real time how things are changing. And this has been especially important when we're looking at climate change or even just land use changes. So our modeling of climate has gotten a lot better. That's why sometimes you hear like, oh, it used to be global warming and now it's climate change. Well, that's what science does. We learn things, we get better at seeing really what things are developing. We got really good at mapping species, where they are, both trees and animals, other things. And then also mapping soil, which maybe sounds boring to you, but that's really like the crux of all life is soil. It's so important. It started really accelerating though in the 2000s, where we started integrating AI into our mapping, into our geographic information systems, which you can get a certificate in at UVU. If this is interesting to you, you can study it here. Either we have a major, but you can also just get a certificate. It's really cool. Now, we had a lot of really cool processing of hyperspectral data, kind of like what Dustin was talking about in his application in studying cancer. We also have similar kind of applications in studying different spectrums of light from the Earth. And it had us like this really, really, really big breakthroughs because it wasn't just analyzing data for us, but it was also helping us reveal changes that maybe we couldn't see, but it could see in other ways. So I'll just show a few examples of this. The really classic applications of AI and remote sensing has been to study glacier changes over time. So that's what this is showing. It's just showing you how glaciers around the world have been lost. So you have the first image is in, it's not a satellite in 1957, it would be like aerial imagery, aerial photography. But then we have a repeat in 2018, the same, and then we can calculate how much the ice elevation has changed in that. So it's showing you loss of ice, but then it's also showing you like the depth of ice change. And that's like really amazing that we can measure that so precisely. Amazing things. We can also use it to compile a lot of data we have on surface temperature, and we can see like how have our cities heated up over time. And this is showing us Salt Lake City comparing 1993 to 2017, and you'll see the legend. So the more redder, oranger colors are hotter, and the bluer colors are colder. So when you're looking at maps like this, if you're not a geographer and you don't love looking at maps all the time, crash course, when you're reading a map, they can be read just like texts. You're looking for patterns of similar things, and you're kind of looking for outliers. So you might say like, there's a lot more orange now in the 2017 map, but there's a few places that are still kind of cool, those outliers. So overall, though, we can see like, oh yeah, Salt Lake City, actually it's gotten warmer over time, our surface temperature, and that has a lot of implications for urban planning, for like even how much you have to run your air conditioning over time. You kind of hear this anecdotally, like, oh, I used to be able to sleep with my windows open all summer. Ask your family, your older family. But now it's too hot to do that. But we have now really pretty precise measurements to show that. Okay, since 2010s, it's been amazing just what we can see in terms of geographic data. So remote sensing, image analysis, and it's all tied with AI, machine learning, and big data. And I don't do this work, but I love it because we can really see how amazing it is. So I just have a few key places that I think this is really transformed. Climate and weather modeling, biodiversity, air quality, and disaster management. So things that are all useful for us in our societies and like as managers and planners. Like these are things we need to know as folks that exist in a society together. I wanted to show you one of my favorite websites really fast also. Let me make this a lot bigger so you can see it too. Okay, this is appearing up there. Okay, so this company, Esri, they're one of the major mapping GIS companies. But what they've done is they've taken satellite imagery for the whole world and compiled into this amazing tool where you can compare land use, land cover change from 2017 to 2025. So it's a shorter time scale, but it can show you in that about 10 years how have things changed. So I just thought we could look at that for a minute because it's cool. So this is West Africa. I was a Peace Corps volunteer here after college, and I'm starting a project and taking students next summer to West Africa where I was to study forest management and sacred forests, kind of cultural forest management. If you want to go, let me know after my talk. But this is really amazing because you can slide this and you can see how much forest has been lost. See, this is 2017. Can you see the green? That's what we're looking at. And then now 2025. So that tells you something, right? These changes. Oh, there's been a lot of deforestation. What does that mean for communities? What does that mean? Is it agriculture? Is it cash crops? Like what's happening here? But isn't that powerful? Let's also look at our own area. And this is amazing because it's the whole world. Like, it's the whole freaking world is covered in these 10-meter squares of land use, land coverage. This is like unprecedented, y'all. Unprecedented. When I went to college, I remember getting an email address, an electronic mail address. I was like, this is dumb. When am I ever going to use this? But now we can see what's happening in the whole world. Like it's cool and it's useful. Okay, so this is our area. This is the red is showing built areas like cities, basically. So let's see maybe how we know there's been a lot of growth in Utah County. So let's slide over here. Do you see that story? So that's 2017. And this is now. So you see the red expanding. And maybe you know that kind of intuitively, you've seen that, but now we can measure it and we can start to ask questions and then we can start to plan for the future. So AI has really, really great applications. And so if you want to explore this on your own, just type in Google Living Atlas Layer Land Use Land Cover Change, and it'll take you here. It's free. It's free. Amazing. So I spent way too much time looking at that last night when I was preparing for this talk. Okay. So, but what about this new age of AI? That's kind of what we're talking about. So a lot of folks in my area are like, sure, AI is pretty amazing because we can see these earth changes and we can measure them But that's not what's happening now with this explosion of these large language models. And the energy use and water use is something that is really concerning, or something that we should at least think about. So we could ask, like, is it an equivalent use to try to measure data of deforestation of rainforests? Or we can maybe create a cute image like I'll have at the end. Those actually use maybe even similar amounts of energy and data. Okay, so just a brief background of our energy consumption and our data. So maybe you've heard of this. Have you heard some conversation about oh yeah, these large language models use a lot of energy? Have you all heard about this a little bit? If you haven't, yay, you're going to learn something today. If you have, that's okay. We'll kind of put it in our own context in our state. So the scale of the problem is the first thing. So as geographers, we're always thinking about that. Like, what's the scale of this? Is it local, national? Because just a few of us using things or driving isn't the problem. But it's like the scale of these things when everybody is using these large language models, that becomes really interesting. So by some accounts, training one of these can use as much electricity as powering 100 homes in the US, which we're like the biggest consumers of energy in the world. Produces a lot of carbon depending on your energy source. And in Utah, we don't have a lot of renewables in our infrastructure grid. At UVU, we actually do. We're pretty good at that. But in our larger state, it's really something we need to work on. So like Dustin said, there's just so much data that these training models are on. And all of the servers take energy, all the data centers that we see popping up, they all require a lot of energy. And depending on where your energy source is from, that emits a lot of carbon. Another hidden thing that maybe we don't think about as much is water usage of these data centers too. So when I first moved to Utah, I remember this was a big story because the Meta data center was going in up in Bluffdale, and the NSA data center, the National Security Agency. If the overlords are spying on us, all of our data is held right here in Bluffdale, Utah, and uses a lot of water, and it wasn't transparent where the water was coming from, how they were paying for it, how they were going to recycle it. It just really wasn't. And in Utah, I don't know if you know, our water market is separate than our real estate market. So you can sell, if you own a piece of land, you can sell the land and you can also sell the water rights separately. But the water rights, actually, you don't have to report the price at which you sell them, which is different than the land. You have to report the price at which you sell them. So there's this huge water market in Utah that's really kind of not transparent. We don't really know how much water is costing, but we know that data centers are coming in, and we know they're purchasing water, most likely from agriculture. So we see our state changing, for better or for worse, maybe it's good. But a lot of times the water usage and the data center impacts are really local. So we see a lot of these happening in Utah and Phoenix. So local matters. That's why geography is so cool, because things all happen in place. We tend to think of AI or the cloud as there. But it's happening in place. There's hard infrastructure that you can see and you can measure and you can see the environmental impacts of it. So we might consider where is it appropriate to have data centers? Where should we not have them? Should we have them in Utah? This was just a story this summer from the Deseret News, not, a wildly leftist publication at all. This is a conversation that our leaders are having at the state of Utah, thankfully. And this map is just from last week at the National Drought Monitor. We have these maps that we're monitoring how much precipitation we have every year, and they publish these maps weekly. So this was last week's, and you can see the scale Most of Utah is in a moderate, severe, maybe even extreme drought. So, what do we want to prioritize in our state? How are we balancing the need for economic growth, AI data centers, and water for our agriculture, water for our cities, and water for our shrinking Great Salt Lake? You maybe have heard this. By some accounts, the Great Salt Lake has lost up to 40%, and this changes yearly. And we had a good year a couple years ago. We had a really good winter, so the Great Salt Lake was pretty good. Now, pretty average where we are. And this winter, the reports I've read for this winter are not amazing, but it's, you never know. So hopefully we'll have another good winter, but we can't just rely on hopefully we'll have a good winter because we know climate change is happening and we know that there's these competing demands for our water. So a lot of times we hear okay, yeah, that's great, but actually AI is going to solve this problem anyway because we're going to be able to use AI to think of new ways and think of efficiencies and be able to work on this. So it's a temporary problem, maybe not a long-term problem. And a lot of states right now, especially in the West, are banking on nuclear energy. This has been a resurgence in the last really few years with this explosion of data centers, saying we need new energy sources. And we're investing heavily in these small nuclear reactors. And nuclear energy is pretty good in a lot of ways. It's a clean energy in a lot of ways, but it doesn't mean that it's without risk. And when we're thinking about nuclear energy in Utah, we have a history of uranium mining really being damaging to our indigenous communities. So this is a map of abandoned uranium mines on the Navajo Nation. There's 500 abandoned uranium mines, and the EPA is working to address those, but that's a lot of abandoned uranium mines. And we're not sure how these are affecting water quality, and we're not sure how they're affecting localized air quality. So uranium is what feeds nuclear power, nuclear energy, also nuclear weapons. And it's radioactive. There's been a lot of testing in the West. We have the whole West Desert in Utah that's had a lot of uranium weapons testing over time. So we have a lot of this history in Utah. So now we have to ask, are we going to do it better this time? Because we know what we've done in the past. So are we going to have these questions of environmental justice? Are we going to learn from what we did and do better? So if we're thinking about nuclear energy, which we are, we're going forward full throttle. And I think our leaders are thinking about this, but I think we can always, as interested citizens, make sure that these questions are in the forefront. So are we externalizing the cost? That's what environmental scientists and geographers think about a lot. These questions of environmental issues are often externalized. They're don't really matter, but we'll kind of think about them in the afterthought if they're a problem. Are we making these kind of sacrifice zones? What about communities that live in these places? What kind of role do they have in deciding what happens? Okay, for my almost last slide, I think just as we're moving forward and thinking about nuclear energy, I think it brings up kind of us full circle to this idea of ethics and AI and science. It says we're not questioning how much power do we need, how much AI do we need. That's not the question. We're just saying how can we power it better instead of saying do we have enough? So yeah, the ethical problem I think still remains. And then for fun, here's my fun ChatGPT created image. I was create an image of Willie the Wolverine for this talk. And it knows about me because it knows I study Africa, but also Mongolia. So it put those two together. Isn't that fun? And Utah Lake is the Caspian Sea or something. And I garden too. So I've asked my technology overlords about that too. thank you so much for paying attention to us. We're excited to hear questions and talk about it. So yeah, let's open the floor. I'm going to come around with a microphone to whoever is first. And we're going to use the microphone because it's being recorded.
Yeah, well, I just have a question about the Bluffdale data center. How much data does that hold just for the state of Utah, or
The US.
the whole entire U.S.?
Yeah.
Is it Bluffdale, Utah?
Okay, for our NSA, for the National Security Agency.
Okay, and there's a whole bunch around other states.
So there all sorts of things have data centers, like Facebook, Meta has a ton, Google has a ton. But this one is specifically our agency for national security. So our federal government agency that would collect any sort of data. Yeah. And it's, there's a lot of questions about what happens there. Yeah. But you can read, if you just Google it, you can read all about it. Yeah.
It's not recyclable or
Okay, so a lot of times the data centers, they have to use really pure water. So a lot of times they have to heat up the water first. So they don't use like the secondary water, like the agriculture water. So they do like, it's almost like drinking water, but even more grade. But a lot of times they will put their like used water to water golf courses and stuff. And that's what communities are trying. I know that's a laugh, but that's what communities are trying to do. Like, okay, the used water, how can we use that? Because we can't use it for drinking water really, but we could use it for parks or golf courses.
And that's really causing us to have more of a drought than we already do have here.
Okay, so in Utah, we have a pretty fixed amount of water. We have a lot, like it's okay. And we know that our municipalities, like our municipal use is about 15% of our water usage, maybe 20% of our water usage in Utah. So that would count in that 15%. And so I tried to track this. It was really hard because there's if you sell water, you have to mark that you sell it. So my students and I tried to track it, like how much agriculture water is being transformed to municipal water. It was really hard to track, but that's kind of the story that's happening now, especially around here. A lot of our agriculture is becoming city water. So I don't know like what percentage of water that data center uses, but it's part of that municipal category. And depending on where you are, like if you live in Lehigh, you have water shortages and water restrictions this summer. Does anyone live in Lehigh? Did you have water restrictions this summer, like in watering your lawn and stuff? Yeah. So not all cities have that. That's like water history and rights in Utah are a whole interesting thing. But depending on your city, you'll have water restrictions. And that's part of that because they're going to be giving water to those like industrial uses. Yeah. Who's next? Sure.
I'm just thinking about sort of the eternal growth idea with AI, where as we go into future decades, it has to continuously be updated with more information. We're constantly correcting, adding, everything that happens historically has to be put into it, right? And so, eventually there is this upper cap of we can't just continue adding more. And I'm wondering what international organizations are working to make sure that there's regulations imposed before we get close to that sort of precipice.
Thank you.
So, I mean, that's a really interesting question. As far as I know, there aren't any bodies that are, let me rephrase, there aren't any regulatory bodies that are doing this. There's no international organization. A lot of the big companies are talking to each other about stuff like this, but most of the conversation and most of what's happening in regards to that is actually trying to increase that cap by getting better storage material, better storage, better. I mean, We're at the point now that we can't make the circuit smaller because just physically there's not enough atoms that you can cut out anymore on your circuit boards. And what's doing that? So, but they're looking at other ways of making changes. Like, even though this wasn't AI driven, the entire change from a hard drive to a solid state device was done for this reason, right? They found ways to get more out of the space that they had because the circuits themselves can't change. So what else can we change about it? And so companies are talking about it, and companies are arguing about it. And who's the Chat GPT? OpenAI. They're a really big driver in that, in your specific question. But you got to remember, they're a for-profit company, and they're the ones who are making the decisions at the moment.
Um, this wasn't exactly your question, but I think something that's related to just the growth of these AI models is, I mean, a lot of the things that these large language models are producing are being put on the internet, which means that they're now part of the training set. And there's starting evidence that AI is training itself is starting to creep in, where it's, it's no longer being, there we can trace things through and see that, the AI models are being trained on AI produced data, which I don't think we fully know what that means yet, but I don't like it.
Just to add to that, don't forget about the hallucinations that are now being trained for future hallucinations.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay, one of the tenets of science is reproducibility. Has anyone looked at like large language models and looked at the reproducibility element? For example, if you're doing modeling, finite element modeling, and you change minorly your grid, you shouldn't have a huge change in the output. With large language models, has anyone looked at changing in minor ways the input text to see the scale of change of the output?
So my understanding is that is, like, for instance, I mentioned OpenAI. They are actively doing things like that. They are actively changing the papers that I see come out of there, which I only follow tangentially. I'm not dedicated researcher on it. But when I see things, they do care about the science. They do care about reproducibility. And so they are trying things, but it's really hard when you're talking about the large scale. How do you change the internet to get a training to go again? And so it's an open question, I think, that they're trying to do, but they're trying to show it in small ways. And I don't know what is out there that would allow you to actually do that. Because, I mean, you can kind of look at the differences between the companies maybe as reproducibility, right? So you could look at Claude and what it's doing. You could look at ChatGPT. You could look at Copilot. You could look at the different, because they don't share their training models because that's the proprietary part and what they're hoping to make their money off of. And so I think the closest we can get is to see, does Copilot, does ChatGPT, do whatever one you want to throw out there, Google Gemini, are they giving similar or same responses? And in what ways are their hallucinations the same and or different? But I don't know of anyone who's actively publishing about that yet. I also think we're a little too close to where it came. So,
Minorly changing the input text.
right.
So it's the same intention, and that would give us some idea of the reliability of the output.
Right. And I think the closest that we can get there is by minorly changing our questions, because we don't have control of the input itself.
And even that gets tricky because the model remembers the user, so it can't be the same person asking the slightly different questions every time. And yeah, this is a really difficult question to test because we can't manipulate the model ourselves, right? Any sort of testing really has to happen. Any sort of internal testing is going to happen at these companies, and they're going to have to do it themselves because we don't have access to the model and everything. We can do the comparisons that John was talking about. We can compare the AI outputs to what we know are correct answers, but that only works if we know what the correct answer is. Um,
Thank you. Over here on this side, are there questions? Yeah.
Thank you so much for your talk. I'm in humanities, in a humanities department, not in the sciences. And I was thinking from a humanities perspective about what you said, Dr. Anderson, about trust and how people overtrust the models. And I think a lot of this comes from the way we use language and the way we use imagery to think about AI. And we use a lot of anthropomorphizing language. I mean, I think the term hallucination itself, I think artificial intelligence is and anthropomorphization. And images like the Terminator can sort of put kind of pictures in our minds that maybe make us think in certain ways. And so I'm just wondering how you as scientists think about anthropomorphizing and sort of the images that we use.
I love that question. In fact, that's why I put the Terminator on there for my theory of technological dominance, right? I had a very specific image in mind that I wanted to get across to just a little bit of that scare factor, a little bit of that thought factor. Um, I, despite being a scientist and an engineer, anthropomorphize everything, right? All of my cars have been named, and I talk to them as I drive. Sometimes that keeps me from getting upset at the person in front of me. Most of the time, it doesn't. But I think you're right. That's a large part of human nature, and I think that we're seeing that. Like you said, the hallucinations are there. That's a very clear word that comes from us, not from machines. And so I think you're right. I think that a lot of the language that is used plays a big role in that. The number of news articles that my web browser wants me to read related to AI and the people who are trying to marry their AI is astounding, right? And it's not, there's some pretty intelligent people that I know that think of their AI as their best friend because it gives them the answers that it needs. It gives them the comfort that they need. It gives them not necessarily the platitudes, but it's pulling real advice and it's really helping them to the point that they think it's not artificial. So I think that's a really incredibly valuable insight to point out. Thank you.
I agree. I'm going to be vulnerable and share a little bit of my experience with anthropomorphizing ChatGPT. So I'm a fan of ChatGPT. I use it. And like a few months ago, they did an update where, and they know it would not say like, "Good job, Hillary, you did this so well." And I was like, "Oh, I missed that." Like, why isn't my algorithm telling me I'm so smart anymore? Like, and then they fixed it because so many users felt the same way I did. But I was like aware of myself. I was like, "Oh, wow. I can see how people develop relationships with this." Because it's always like, "Hillary, that's such a great question that you're offering for your students. Wait, I can tell you're a thoughtful." I'm like, "Ah, my supervisors don't tell me this." Yeah, Danny.
Hillary, sorry, one more thing on that before we get to his question. But I think you said something that's really important there. Of you were aware of yourself, and you know that you were anthropomorphizing, and yeah, just cognizant of that. And because I mean, AI isn't the first thing that we've anthropomorphized. I do that all, teaching a physics class. I can say like the ball wants to roll to the bottom of the hill. I know that the ball doesn't want to do anything, but I say it anyway. But I'm aware, like as long as I'm aware that the ball isn't exercising its free will, um, then it's okay. So I mean, I would say that I mean anthropomorphizing is a really natural thing with whatever we do. I think language was developed so that humans could interact with each other, and a lot of those tools are the language tools work better when we're talking to or about people. Um, but it's important to know that we're doing that and to, remember what AI is, what it can do, and what it can't do.
That leads pretty well into my question, actually, which is, do we actually have models for understanding exactly, like, proportionate to, like, some empirical data like what are like some method of interpreting the extent to which anthropomorphization is accurate? Because I feel like you said, anthropomorphization is actually kind of almost necessary just due to the way that we understand and perceive things. And so I guess that was just
So if I'm understanding right, is your question, do we have data on how much more people talk about AI as a human than they talk about other things as a human? Or
I'm more so asking like if we have like a concept, like maybe a concept in physics,
yeah,
um, like to what extent would like to say like the ball wants to roll, right? Like that's sort of equivalent to saying, um, I don't know, like the force is motivated by, another force, like, and of course I ended up anthropomorphizing again,
right.
right? So it's like, do we have like just a way of comparing words in that way? Is that, hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah. On a large scale, I haven't heard of that. I have seen some studies. I mean, this is long before AI, but studies on the way that students talk about different concepts as they're learning them and how their language changes over time, and how it become, yeah, how they're able to make their understanding of the concepts more abstract and how that abstraction gets reflected in their language. A lot of times early on, you always make analogies, and you understand the analogy, but you don't understand the concept underneath the analogy. And so you can only talk in terms of the analogy. But then as you get a little bit more proficient, you can use the analogy to help you understand it. But then you have other analogies that help you, or maybe you're even talking about something completely independent of that specific application and things. And yeah, that changes as you get more familiar and more proficient with the topic. And yeah, I mean, completely anecdotally without data, I think I've heard that from the way that different people talk about AI. So somebody who is just signed up for the ChatGPT subscription, has no experience with AI at all, they talk about their interactions with the AI very differently than someone who has, in a different context, trained their own machine learning models. The relationship is different, I think. And I think a lot of that comes from the familiarity and proficiency with using it.
I really like this question about anthropomorphizing. It makes me think about something we did in my classes this week. So we're talking about different ways that we understand our place and relationship to environment. And we're looking at indigenous environmental ethics, and looking at like more thinking about the environment as relatives, specifically like in relation to bodies of water. So I have my students do an exercise where they narrate bodies of water in the first person. They say, oh, like I am Utah Lake. I start in the headwaters of the Uinta Mountains and I flow through the Provo River and I end up in Utah Lake. And it's all, based on some models of indigenous environmental ethics. And that is hard for students to anthropomorphize nature and see that as a relative. But maybe it's not as hard for them to imagine they're like ChatGPT as a friend. But they can't, it's a different leap to understand these other things as relatives. Yeah, I'm going to have to ask them about that next week. Thank you for that idea. I think we're out of time. Thank you so much for coming and exchanging ideas with us. Thanks to my wonderful colleagues, and thanks to the Ethics Center for inviting us to talk with you all. Stay for the keynote next.